Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson. And today we're joined by Sarah Turner, co-founder and CEO of SaraThrive, a red light system that specifically targets the gut-brain connection. Sarah holds degrees in clinical neuroscience, psychological sciences, and nutritional medicine. And in today's conversation, we discuss photobiomodulation and specifically how to use light therapy to support health by addressing the gut and the brain together. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
I'm so excited to just pick your brain today. And since we're going to be talking about brains, this will be good. But I always love to hear personal story. You know, how did you decide I'm going to create this amazing product that focuses on the gut-brain connection?
Well, my trajectory is kind of through maybe a lot of conventional medicine and then to alternative. And now I've kind of settled on light therapy as a good middle ground. But I started off in pharmaceutical research, actually.
Oh, wow.
So when during studying at university, and then after I left, I was at various drug companies, Merck Sharp and Dohme and Glaxo. I spent a fair amount of time in inhaled product research, so looking at asthma devices. And I did kind of come across the limitations of that kind of therapy. In a way, you know, it became obvious, you know, that the drugs are good for certain things, but for these long-term conditions, there are a lot of limitations there. And so I switched to do nutritional medicine, and I did that for a while, and I set up a little health food shop, and I had a nutrition consultancy. But again, there were even limitations there that I found. So I then went on to look at neuroscience, and I studied clinical neuroscience in London. And after which time I went to California and got involved in the whole biohacking movement that was going on over there.
Which is how we met.
Exactly. The Dave Asprey Biohacker Summit. And actually, that was one of the places where I first started getting to really understand this concept of introducing biophysics into biology and health, into a health setting. And so I was working actually in Santa Cruz, California on a consciousness interface device, which is a fairly out there fringe science way of looking at information fields.
Wow, that's a long way away from pharmaceutical research.
Yeah, it's the two extremes really, because in pharmaceutical research, you really are kind of just following a program. You've got very specific rules that you're following. You know, you have to follow good laboratory practice, and it's, you know, you're quite confined. And then, you know, in this very alternative fringe science, you know, people are much more, you know, you're chucking all of that out and you're having to think about the body and science in a very different way. So I feel like I did the two extremes. And then after doing that for a while, I kind of wanted to come back to something which was a little bit more measurable, because although the alternative side is very interesting, because we can't yet measure it, or perhaps, you know, there's certain things that are not quite right there, it's very difficult to really get your teeth into it and say something with kind of any certainty. You know, there's a lot of, oh, it could be this, you know, and a lot of people are open to that, and that's great, and a lot of people are helped by that. But for me personally, I wanted to do something that was much more measurable, scientific, at least in the sense that you can document these effects and present them to people and you know, speak to the scientific community as well as to the alternative health community. So that's why really I'm now focused solely on photobiomodulation, which is just this long word for light therapy. Because although light therapy, of course, it is a little bit esoteric, because nobody even really knows what light is, you know. So there has to be there has to be, you know, some kind of intuitive, open-minded way of looking at it. But at the same time, there is a lot of very credible, validated research. You know, there's, you know, 5,000 peer-reviewed studies on light therapy for a health application. So that's kind of where I've settled now. I think I've found this ideal middle ground.
I love it because it really is. I always find it fascinating that what are really foundational basics for humankind is now cutting edge science and wellness care. And I think, you know, you say light therapy. I love the word photobiomodulation because it's about changing our biology with light. Right. And so it's not just, you know, and there's so many different kinds of light and ways to use light to support health. How did you kind of narrow down into this gut-brain connected area?
Yeah, well, as I said to you, I have a master's in neuroscience, so I was already sort of fixated on the brain. And then in doing a lot of this biohacking, I made a biohacking movie, or at least co-produced it with a friend of mine. I started to really understand this whole connected body piece. And, you know, if you want to have a good brain, you know, you can't isolate the brain from the rest of the body. That's just not how things work. And so I got more and more interested in a kind of systemic approach to biology. And then this is especially important actually in photobiomodulation, because you're talking about getting light to the organ. You know, you're talking about actually irradiating a body part with light. And when you think of the brain, it's not the most accessible organ in the body. You know, there are a lot of barriers. Hair's a barrier, you know, bone is a barrier. It's kind of awkward to have this thing, you know, shining light onto the head. You know, the head is round, you know, you have to have something that contours to the head to actually get a chance even of getting a very small percentage of light to the brain. So that's why I started thinking, one, there is a systemic, you know, there's a systemic part of it in that everything in the body is connected. And then there's also a very practical part of it in that it's difficult to get light to the brain. So if you really want to have the maximum chance of getting a good dose of light to the body generally, I think it's, you know, it makes sense to access something like the gut, where you can deliver a lot of the light, and, you know, the effects of that are going to get to the brain. All the blood that's in the gut is going to get to the brain. The microbiome that's in the gut talks to the brain. The vagus nerve talks to the brain. So from my point of view, the whole gut-brain connection is important in all chronic illness, but very specifically important in photobiomodulation, when you're talking about getting light to the brain, you know, which isn't the easiest of jobs.
I love that. And I really love the seemingly newer knowledge that, you know, that this two-directional. We used to think, oh, the brain is just in charge of the body and sending all the signals. And now we know, no, actually, it's a two-way street, and a lot of stuff starts in the gut. And, you know, we've covered on the podcast many times before the importance of gut health and autoimmunity and immunity in general. And so I love this. It just makes sense now that you've put it out there that if we want to get to the brain, you know, including the gut in that equation is essential.
Yeah, you're right. And from a point of view of immunity, you know, a lot of the immune responses in the brain, you know, do start in the gut. A lot of neurotransmitters start in the gut, like the endocannabinoid system. You know, we know that is a link between brain immunity and the body generally, and our body is covered in these kind of receptors, and all of these receptors, all of these systems seem to respond in some way to light therapy. You know, even, you know, the whole concept of inflammation, you know, we now know a lot of brain conditions are caused by chronic inflammation.
Pretty much, you know, most of them.
Most of them. If you can kind of reduce the inflammation in the body generally, you know, you've got a much better chance of dealing with issues that you have with the brain. So I think it is really super linked to the immune system, actually, what's going on. And I think the gut is playing such a huge part in the immunity of the brain. And you're right, you know, we kind of intuitively know this, and a lot of people who are into alternative medicine have been kind of banging this drum for a long time. But now in mainstream media, you know, if you go on LinkedIn, there's always a post there about a new disease that's been linked to the gut-brain connection. You know, we know about Parkinson's now. There's autistic spectrum disorder, addictive personality disorder. Every time people are starting to see
Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's, yeah, all the kinds of neurodegeneration, there does seem to be this link between the immune system, the gut, and the brain.
Which is, I just love this approach of, okay, if we're really focused on brain, you know, it's the inverse almost to most of the conversations out there. And knowing I'm a certified recode Alzheimer's and dementia coach, and knowing how essential, you know, the gut health is to improving brain function. I love that you're doing this. I want to talk a little bit, because as you said, light therapy has become, you know, there's so many different ways, and what you're doing is really unique and cutting edge, and I'm sure there will be a lot of companies following suit. But how do people know the different, I mean, there's so many different kinds of light, like tell me a little bit more about how the audience can become educated as to what to look for in light devices, and maybe, you know, certain lights going for certain things.
Yeah, you're right. There are a lot of products on the market, and I think it very much depends on what your health goal is, on which of these products that you go for. Because, you know, if you've got like a bashed knee from an injury, you know, you'd probably want a different device as if you've got some kind of pre-dementia. So I think the most important thing is to kind of decide, okay, what is the main purpose for the device? And then try and find devices which have some degree of flexibility. Because I think one of the main things that I found out about, you know, light therapy is, of course, light travels in a straight line. We know that. But this is very important for looking at the body and treating all different things on the body, because the body's not flat, you know. So the panels are great if you're a biohacker and you want to keep your body in a very good condition, but they're maybe not so good if you're looking to really get to a specific area. You know, if you want to get like deep into a knee joint, or if you actually want to kind of get deep into the gut, or especially if you want to get into the brain, you really need to have a device that contours to the body, you know, that's round, and so it will deliver light in the way that aids maximum penetration, because you've got to bear in mind you've got these straight lines of light coming in. And then the other thing is also you want to look at the color of light, or the wavelength, because the longer the wavelength of light, generally as a rule, the deeper it will travel into the body. So you'll see a lot of the devices on the market have a red light, which is usually in the range of like 600 to 650 nanometers, and then a near infrared light, which is usually about 850, 810, 850 nanometers. And the reason why they have those two colors is because red light will only penetrate superficially. So, you know, if you're treating skin disorders or wounds or something, red light's great. But if you do want to get into that joint or onto the surface of the brain or into the gut, you do need a longer wavelength of light. So you need something that's above 850 nanometers for that.
And that's, I think, essential for people to understand. And like you said, it goes back to, what is your intention?
Yes.
What's your goal? And for me, I mean, and again, I'd like, if we could all do all of it,
yes,
that would be ideal. But I can't think of any way in which it wouldn't make sense to prioritize brain health, whether you're a biohacker and you want to be up leveling and protecting from decline, or, you know, like our brain health is essential to our quality of life, no matter what else is going on.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's been my take from the beginning. You know, if you've got a good brain and you're functioning well, you know, you can deal with most other things that are coming up, you know, even pain. You know, if your brain is working, if you've got enough sleep, you know, if you're taking care of how you're doing mentally, you know, all of these things the challenges become, you can deal with them better. So I think, yeah, prioritizing the brain, and the way to do that is, treat the gut, prioritize the brain, and then a lot of these other health conditions kind of come into focus a little bit more. And you're right, the preventative side, we are, unfortunately, we're coming, we have a generation of people which are facing a lot of dementia because, the rates are on the rise for all many different reasons. So yeah, kind of maintaining good health as you age also, by treating your brain first and foremost. For me, that seems to be, where I always start is with brain health.
And have you found at all, because I'm thinking, okay, you're treating gut and brain. And so people with gut issues, I would imagine that the panel on the belly is a great idea.
It is. And I actually myself, I had a little bit of IBS. Maybe you call it IBD in the States, but irritable bowel.
Both, yeah.
And I have found that has drastically diminished to the point where I don't notice that anymore. But of course, it's like, you can't say, oh, the IBS has gone back, and how does that affect the brain? Because of course, we spoke about, you have this two-way thing. Once you're fixing that issue, you're fixing the brain, the fogginess goes, all of that, the kind of anxiety piece goes. So yeah, I think this whole thing about gut brain, I'm sure that this is going to be something that's treated routinely in the future for all of these different things,
Gosh, I hope so. That's why we're having these conversations, right? Because
exactly right.
Yeah,
because for things like Parkinson's, as you've mentioned, often the gut symptoms come a long time before the brain symptoms.
Sure. And I love that you just specifically mentioned anxiety, because anxiety and depression are things that people tend to, they can buy into. There's some kind of neurotransmitter or something going on, but that step to gut is still sometimes a bigger leap for people. And I just had a conversation yesterday with somebody, was sharing a story about a past client who didn't come to me for anxiety, but really struggled. She was a high functioning, anxious person. And through what we, just diet change and gut health support that we were doing for her other issues, all of a sudden her anxiety was gone. And this was a very targeted, simple, it was gluten, when she put it back in. And that's not uncommon. I see it a lot. And so it makes, I just want to kind of drive home, we're talking about, I love focusing on dementia and brain health and longevity, but also, the mood disorders really are driven by gut health.
And it's so interesting now, all of the discoveries they're making with the microbiome, because when you think about the human body, we kind of take ownership of this body, but actually we're a lot less human cells than we are bacterial cells. We're kind of
Sure.
We're a collage of all these different organisms that all have their different needs and wants. So, if you have a lot of these kind of detrimental bacteria in your gut, of course, they're putting out their own chemicals, they're doing their own thing. And now they've kind of seen that a lot of people who have a lot of anxiety disorders, depression, those kinds of things, there's a lot of dysbiosis. There's a lot of these potentially not so beneficial bacteria. And they're putting out compounds that are getting to your brain, and then that's could be the cause of some of the depression. So some of this isn't really, it's maybe not even coming from you, as in you, the human, it's coming from your bacterial compadres that are in there doing their own thing. So tackling that, really getting to grips with your gut bacteria, doing all of those things, of course, that could have a huge effect on all of these different kinds of moods, even something as simple as being able to sleep. I saw a really interesting paper the other day about addictive personality disorder. A lot of people's addictions, the cravings can be coming from what the bacteria wants.
Yeah, I deal with that a lot with any kind of a yeast or candida overgrowth.
Yeah,
Driving sugar cravings, and we all know sugar is really addictive. We also know it's inflammatory. But I try to get people to shift and think, okay, as you're having that, like, that's not you. You're not the one screaming to be fed. It's these other organisms.
Yeah.
And so it is amazing. We just don't even realize that we are not always in charge.
Yes. And I think that's quite liberating, because you think, okay, I can do something about this, because, if it's as simple as, focus on your gut bacteria, really try to, like you say, it's difficult to remove the sugar because you've got these creatures that are crying for the sugar.
Because they're going to die if you don't feed them sugar. Which you
all got their agendas. So but it enables you to do things, light therapy has been shown to change the microbiome, dietary change has been shown, simple things like circadian biology, timing your body more with the body's natural rhythms, enables those beneficial bacteria to grow, because, they have their optimal environments too.
And I would assume it's not scientific, but it just, in the way my brain works, I think of, the red light or the light on the gut nurturing the good bacteria, those things that we want. I just think of it as a positive thing. I don't know the mechanism of action, but I think as we increase the good, there's less room for the bad.
And I think actually at the moment, because the science is so new, we don't entirely know how it's working. I mean, there's a whole field now called photobiomics, which is the study of light on bacteria. And certainly in an animal model, there does seem to be a direct correlation. If you shine light onto a rodent, for example, and then do stool analysis, you can see very directly a correlation between shining light onto the gut and a change in the microbiome composition. And that probably is, you are actually shining light on the bacteria directly, because remember, bacteria and mitochondria, probably have a similar evolutionary history. And the mitochondria is really the main light receiver in the body. In humans, I don't know if we are so sure about that, because, humans come in different shapes and sizes, and yet light seems to have an effect on the microbiome, regardless of, how much light you're getting into the actual gut area. But I think you're right. I think what's really going on is you're allowing the body to return to a homeostasis where you have the right conditions in the gut. You have oxygenated blood going to the gut, you have a decrease in inflammatory chemicals in the gut, then that enables, you create a good environment for the good bacteria to proliferate. So I think it could be that you're shining light directly into the bacteria, but I think maybe more likely at this stage with the light panels and the light pads is that you are enabling the correct environment for those good bacteria to grow.
Yeah, which is the same as diet change, and I wouldn't do one or the other. I would do both, but that's just my approach. Support in every way, shape, or form. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about the SaraThrive. Because it is different than any I've seen. I've been in the biohacking world since 2016. I've seen a lot of, like you said, the light panels are popular. I've seen light you name it. I've seen a lot of different kind of lights. And so let's talk a little specific. And you mentioned some of the things already, but for people who haven't seen a prototype or, don't know exactly what it looks like and what it's doing, let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so the SaraThrive device, it's a system. So it's two devices actually. So we've kind of spoken exactly why you'd want to have a gut brain, a gut for your brain and one for your gut. So it has a panel, actually a flat panel with the two wavelengths that I've mentioned. So it has the 630 and the 850 light that goes directly over the abdomen. And then at the same time, there is a headband, and the headband fits very flush to the forehead where you don't have the hair. So you have one less barrier to get through. It does have one little unit that goes on the back that you can kind of just hopefully poke a little bit under the hairline there. And these are clusters. And in these clusters, there is actually 4 wavelengths, because in the brain, I think probably water is one of the chromophores that's going to be important. So after about 40 nanometers, water starts to absorb light. So in the brain band, there's the red light to get the blood around the head, and then there's also the 850 to penetrate through the skull, and then 940 and 1070. So there's 4 different wavelengths of light. So you're getting to that surface of the brain at the same time as the gut. And then another thing that we can do with the light going to the brain, which is very interesting, is we can pulse that light at certain frequencies, because we know that the brain is oscillating at certain frequencies. We have certain brain waves that are predominant at certain times, depending what we're doing, whether we're alert and focused, whether we're asleep, whether we're kind of daydreaming. Our brain is oscillating at different frequencies. And by providing the light in these different frequencies, you can have an effect on the brain state there. And this is interesting for those conditions we spoke about, for things like anxiety, depression, dementia, where people maybe get stuck in a certain brain state.
Yes.
So that's a very interesting, like, additional function or feature of this device, is that we can change, not only can we change the wavelength of the light, we can also change the rate of oscillation, the Hertz oscillation. So there are 6 different programs in the Sera system for 6 different brain wellness applications.
Love that. And just because I've seen the device, you mentioned the flat pad, and it is a pad. So we touched on earlier that you want something that's going to form to you.
Yes.
And so I was able to see all different sizes and shapes, easily use TheraThrive at the conference we were both at. So I think that I just wanted to loop back to that, where the difference of just having a panel in front of you, you have this pad that is directly on you.
Yeah, you can strap it, you can kind of attach it with Velcro, and you can put the headband on. And that was one of the other criteria that I wanted, because if you said, we're trying to do all the things all the time, but I think one of the barriers is if you have to actually kind of sit by an electrical output,
Right.
I know for me, I'm rushing around all the time. Sometimes carving out that time after you've done all your morning routine and everything else that the biohackers are meant to do is just another barrier to the therapy. So this has a rechargeable battery, a shielded rechargeable battery, so that you can stack your hacks.
And you just mentioned a really good point that I want to hit on, because I am that person who always goes to but what about the EMFs, and what about the Bluetooth, and what about let's touch on that. You mentioned the battery is shielded, because you have a device on your head. You want to make sure you're not doing damage while you're trying to do something good.
Yeah, you don't want to do more harm than good. You're right. And so one of the criteria for designing this device was that the battery had to be totally shielded. And I have one of those Cornet meters that I actually gave to the engineer and said it has to always be on the green reading of this. And so, they're kind of looking at me as if I'm nuts, but they kind of type in the spec, and we had that down as one of the criteria. And then with the app, it is app controlled. So there is a Bluetooth that's giving the command of whatever selection you might have for the pulsing. But then on top of the device, there is a disable switch. So as soon as you've selected your program, you disable the Bluetooth onto the headband, and then there's no Bluetooth going in or out of that for the duration of the session. And people don't have to use the app if they don't want to use the app. If you just want to use it,
the same program over and over. Yeah.
The same program, which was be continuous mode. You don't even have to have the app. But like I say, I'm quite happy that with the Bluetooth disable switch, you're not getting any of that kind of non-negative EMF that you don't want going in there.
And I think that's often overlooked by people. There's lots of the more time marches on, the more gadgets and devices and wonderful things that we get to have. But also, if you can't turn that Bluetooth off, the trackers, it just drives me crazy. I have one that I've had for a long time, because I can put it on airplane mode and it's still doing its thing, but it's not doing anything to me. It's just here for me. And so that was actually one of my most favorite parts of your device, is like, wow, you can tell it's biohacker created because these are the details. It's like having to me like hydrogen water in plastic. Like, no, I don't want the plastic. Figure it out another way.
Yeah.
So I love that you really, I think, have covered all angles. And I believe I overheard you saying you guys will continue to add programs through time, right? It has,
Yes.
yeah.
It has. At the moment, we have 6 programs, and they're ones that have been worked out for kind of for basic functions like focus, energize, meditation. There's a balance one in there. But I've been working with some scientists actually who are more on the physics side that are looking at creating apps to maybe activate certain neurotransmitters or things like that. Now, at the moment, it's a little bit untested. So, you know, that's a process that we're going through. But I'm hoping if we can get some good results with different kinds of frequency programs, we can introduce those as we get them developed. And so the headband has been designed so that you can update the apps that you want to use just through the app on the phone. So that's as new developments come up and people say, okay, well, we think that this way, you know, this frequency pulsing, you know, maybe even a program, you know, I know people who are very granular in how they're working out these pulsing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a straight hertz, like on and off. And in fact, even in this device, we don't just deliver, for example, if we're doing 10 hertz, it's not just 10 times a second, it's in a variable, it's kind of 10 times a second average, but variable, because the body's very variable. You know, we know that the body likes variation because within variation, there's flexibility. Yes. And that's why heart rate's not consistent. You know, that's why brain waves are not consistent, because the body has a built-in flexibility there.
So and I think of like flexibility equals resilience is kind of how I look at, I know, which, so I think that's brilliant that it's not just, you know, a set specific, you know, equally spaced kind of a pattern. Because then I feel like you just get into another loop. It's just a different loop at that point.
Yeah, and it's not how the body works. It's not how the body processes information. The body, you know, it has information well, it seems random, but it has a pattern, and it has a pattern for the reason, like you say, it's resilience, it's flexibility. You know, if you're sitting still and a tiger would jump through this window now, I need my heart to pretty much speed up. You know?
Let's get online. Yeah,
there needs to be that variation, you know, and if you're stuck in a repetitive, you know, it's harder to change. So definitely, as we learn more about how to deliver light, we can update that. And like I say, I think this is something that this is the piece that's taking off now, because people know that light therapy works, but what is the best way to deliver light? What is the best way to pulse light? You know, can you pulse different wavelengths to get different effects? So I think that's now where a lot of the research is going. And, you know, I think we can be much more specific in the future about the application of the different kinds of light and the different pulsing schedules.
Which is exciting. And as you said, this is where the research is going, so that, you know, there will be more and more information, scientific. I do love, you really are dancing that, you know, definitely pure science, but cutting edge at the same time, and pushing barriers. That's how we learn and make progress. So I am excited about that. How do people find Sarah Thrive?
Thank you. Yeah, at the moment it's sarahthrive.com. People can go to the website sarahthrive.com, and then I have most of the socials. I must admit, I'm not brilliant on the socials, but definitely LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook is there with Sarah Thrive or the Sarah System. But all of it can be accessed through the website. sarahthrive.com is probably the easiest way for people to find out. And I'm just Sarah at sarahthrive.com if people want to reach out to me directly.
Which they should. You're brilliant and you're fun, and you make the science accessible. You know, I can sit here and understand what you're saying, and I'm sure listeners are understanding as well. And it really is kind of food for thought. I have a question, because you're the right person to answer it. You know, we're talking about adding light, right? The body receiving light, and specifically the brain. Do we emit light at all?
Yeah, We do emit light. Yeah, we emit ultra weak photonic emissions, which are sometimes called biophotons. And yeah, we're emitting biophotons all the time. And actually, this is maybe one of the ways that light is working in the brain, because when you stimulate the mitochondria, it's really the mitochondria that are producing these kind of ultra weak photonic emissions. And so perhaps that's setting up a cascade, and it's a different communication to neural communication. We already know that things are going on in the brain far faster than the nervous system can account for. There's something else going on, and people have put forward all different theories. Living matrix theory, maybe it's a piezoelectric effect going on there, or so yeah, I think probably the biophotons, which were discovered many years ago. The concept that we're emitting light is not a new one. That this is Gurwich's work, this is Fritz Albert Popp, this is Mei Wan Ho. We're going back to the 1940s and forward from there. But yes, that all living cells emit light. It's just very, very weak, so you can't see it with the naked eye. But there are machines called biophotomultipliers that I've actually seen. I actually went to Fritz Albert Popp in Germany's lab when he was doing the research. And if you put like a cucumber seedling, or if you put a person in there, you can see the light being emitted. So yes, you're right. I think probably Dr. Anne Lieber, one of the most prominent researchers on photobiomodulation, has published a paper on biophotons recently, and a lot of the researchers are talking about it. Dr. Lou Lim, who has the V-Light product. So yes, we are emitting light. And probably, that's a communication that we're maybe missing. You and I were kind of talking, but we met directly in person and probably had that kind of exchange of biophotons.
Sure. Well, and you mentioned, electricity and energy, and so we know we're sensitive to each other's fields, and so I'm sure light is a piece of that. I mean, you think of. I think and this is totally just my own, not scientific. I just wonder if there is a correlation, if we'll discover down the road, maybe not in my lifetime, but the kind of the amount of light we're emitting, how it correlates to health or wellness or just energy in general. Some people. I mean, we may not see the actual light, but we're definitely picking up on. We talk about some people being sunshine, and some, some people have what I would call dark energy, and I wonder if light is a piece of what we're receiving, and we're just not aware.
Oh, for sure. I think for sure. And we already know that cells in different stages will emit different kinds of light and a different degree of light. Cells that are dying perhaps are putting out a lot more UV light. We can kind of measure certain things, but because you need these highly sensitive machines, not many people doing the research. But I think you're totally right. We will find out, these kind of nuances.
This is the woo-woo part that the science will come explain eventually. To me, that's how it all kind of connects, right?
You're right. It's woo-woo until they start measuring it, and then all of a sudden it's science. But there are people, in academic, I know there's a guy at Zurich University, who's an expert in biophotonic emission in bacteria. So, once that information starts to filter down, then it will become interesting, and we'll start to get more and more advanced technology. And there, I'm sure we will definitely find a link between light emission in cells and health.
Sure.
So it makes sense. And then from there, potentially, because we already know that we emit an electromagnetic field, and perhaps that's what you feel. Someone comes in the room and you get the in the room and you think, that's a cool person. That's probably a mixture of all different non-verbal signals, including potentially light, including electromagnetic fields.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never, I've thought about the electromagnetic, and I've never thought about the light, but it does make sense. So that's another fun part to watch. But for now, to me, this leap in again, resources that we have that we can use without going to a doctor's office. I live with a doctor. I love doctors. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying anything we can do for ourselves to support, and something like light that has so many different uses, to me, is just exciting. It really is.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Really, we need to kind of move forward with a bit of sovereignty of ourselves and our wellness, because we're the experts on ourselves, that, and we have our bodies to experiment on. You can kind of get a feeling of if something's right for you or not, or if you're on the wrong path, or if you're feeling good or feeling bad. But also, I think as the society gets bigger and bigger, the health systems in most countries are straining at the seams a little bit. We do need to take that responsibility and do as much as we can. And why not? The tools are available now. We have, it was probably like, I don't know, like fairly recently that we've been able to actually buy these devices and have them ourselves. Just think about lasers when they came out. They were like hundreds of thousands of pounds, and you could only have them in a hospital. Now we can have these devices in our own homes, and they're much more powerful. So why wouldn't we kind of learn about these ways of taking care of ourselves?
I think being in functional medicine, it's again, the science lags behind when we're talking about scientific method, but we know anecdotally when the things that we're doing are working for people, right? People get better. I use light therapy. I broke my shoulder 5 years ago, and the doctor said, which was just rude, oh, at your age, it's going to take a long time for this to heal. And I blew him away, and I didn't take the things he told me to take, because those are things I'm not taking. And he just could not believe how fast in my 50s my bone healed. And I'm like, well, I have tools that you don't use. It's that simple, right? Like, really? Yeah.
I totally applaud that, because every time that you're taking a pharmaceutical intervention, for example, there's a price to pay down the road. And I'm not a big pharma bashing. I mean, how can I? I worked there for a long time.
Well, however, and there's a time and a place.
Yeah, there is a place, and you do have to kind of do a risk assessment every time you do something, because you are going to pay for taking, that's why we do have such an opiate problem around the world, because you're kind of kicking the problem down the road a lot of the time.
Right.
And a lot of these more alternative therapies, like you say, using nutrition, using light, kind of using outdoors, even, you're strengthening the body rather than weakening it.
Yeah.
So you have to weigh it up, because these things, you're not going to get an instant effect, but potentially you're strengthening your body further down the line, versus potentially instant relief, but you're then paying for it later. So I think for everybody, make the choice, but make good choices for yourself, because we're in these bodies
hopefully a long time, and brains, right? And again, it goes back to, how do you want to feel as you age? Is there any, because I was thinking of pharmaceuticals, and listeners know my story. I mean, I was on 10 prescriptions at my sickest, because I needed most of them for the side effects of the other prescriptions. So there's that downside you were talking about. But are there contraindications for, I won't say red light in general, for the Serathrive? Is there anybody who shouldn't use it, or any?
It's a good question. And there are kind of standard contraindications that people say, because I think, like I say, that there is a lot of research, but maybe people want to err on the side of caution. So there's a contraindication for active cancer, for an example, because they don't know, because red light therapy makes cells grow. So potentially there could be some kind of issue there. Actually, there is a lot of data coming out now that doesn't support that. And it actually supports the body's returning again to homeostasis. But I think for safety's sake, and because maybe the data isn't conclusive, that would be a contraindication. But mostly there are no known side effects with this. And like I say, there is a lot of data out there, and really no side effects. I would say one thing, that it does seem to be what they call a biphasic dose response, in that you can overdo it.
Okay.
Not that it's going to make you ill, but you could potentially negate the effect, the good effect.
Okay.
And
I love that idea, because so many people have that mentality of, if good is good, then more is better.
Yes.
So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And I think you need to hit a sweet spot. And I think that's different for everybody. It depends what kind of state your mitochondria are in. If your mitochondria are pretty shot to bits, if you've been ill, or if you're very elderly, or if there's some reason why you've become depleted, you maybe need less light. You can maybe deal with less light.
Okay.
And so for most people, I would say, gauge yourself well. Don't go and overdo it.
Don't wear it all the time because you can.
Don't wear it all the time just because you can, and don't think more is better, because actually, a lot of the studies have shown that really the body responds to very low dose light.
Okay.
And I think what happens is, if you use the light too much, or if you shine, red light into the gut too much, your cells do start speeding up, but they start to produce waste products. And if you create too many waste products that your kind of lymph can deal with, or that your waste removal systems can deal with, then potentially, you're not getting those beneficial effects. So the Sarah Thrive system in particular is just 10 minutes, and it's like 3 to 5 times a week.
So it's not even daily.
No, it's not even daily, because I also think, maybe the body needs to
regenerate or do its thing in between. Yeah.
Because every time it's almost like exercise, you don't want to do it all the time, because the body needs to recover in between. But every time you do it, you kind of strengthen a little bit further than the time before, because you're shining light, the body receives the light, and I need to make more light receivers. So it will do that, if you give it time. And then the next time you can tolerate a little bit more light, and then the next time, and the next time. So I see it very much like exercise. You want to strengthen the body slowly. And so let the body kind of adapt to the light, and not just use it, 100% straight away. And I think that's borne out in the research. A lot of the data tends to show that there is a middle ground. Too little light's not really going to do much. Just about the right amount is going to have a great effect. If you overdo it, the effect starts to drop off again. It's just, we can't say numbers, which of course is what everybody wants.
But we're all different. So how do you do that? You can't standardize, and that's where we need to give a little grace, and that anecdotal stuff comes into play, right? Like, I know my body and I know what feels good. And I love that analogy to exercise, because I meet so many people, especially that have felt a decline with autoimmunity, that are, they will not give up their exercise, because that's where, they've drawn that line in the sand, and they're hurt. It's not serving them, because they're over exercising for where their body is right now. And so I love that, and we know, and if you ask how they feel after they exercise, they'll tell you terrible. I'm like, well, that's information, and so there's no standard for a lot of these things.
No, and that's actually a hard lesson. Actually, I've found that a hard lesson myself, because I definitely was one of those people that was maybe doing too much. Because do hot yoga one night, then I would do a kung fu class, then I'd be doing, because you kind of have a mindset of, you don't want to let your fitness drop off,
right?
But actually, integrating some recovery days is, what a revelation, is very beneficial.
No, but it was an important thing to bring up, and so I'm glad you brought it up with the light too. And then then you get that where you can actually feel the benefit of the exercise when you have that rest in between.
That's right. Yeah, and your body actually gets that chance to recover and repair, which is a vital piece. They tell you all the time in yoga, the laying down, this kind of
Shavasana is my favorite pose.
And it took me a while to get it, and now I think you can apply that to a lot of these different therapies. Even with some of the nutrition, you don't want to kind of do the same supplements over and over again. Maybe cycle things through, because the body, again, it's that whole flexibility thing. It likes to be able to rest and recover, grow a little bit more. It's a cyclical thing. So I think to kind of come back on your thing about contraindications, that's really as much of a side effect or a contraindication that there is. So, I mean, certain things like epilepsy potentially could be a
I was
contraindication.
thinking about that. I was curious. Yeah.
Again, there's a lot of studies to show that photobiomodulation is actually effective for epilepsy. So I think it is a case of doing the research and working out what works for you. I mean, certainly it's not going into the eyes. So all of those
Right. It's not like wearing a mask with lights or yeah. Well, and I think, and the cancer thing, I totally, I'm familiar with the concerns there, and I won't be surprised when science comes out to say no, light is still okay. I have a medical grade laser and was using it on my dogs and and my horses and myself. And then I had a dog diagnosed with cancer. And so I did stop using it on her because I don't know for sure. Yes. Right. And so,
And with all of these things, we're talking, I mean, I am not qualified to talk about medical conditions specifically. Sure. With all of these things, check it out with a medical professional.
Absolutely.
And if someone who knows about these things, but I think more and more medical specialists will start to look at this, and you'll be able to see a specialist oncologist or whatever the condition is who will be able to kind of guide people through the process. But right now we're not really there, so it's really down to people to take their own responsibility, to do their own due diligence, and if in doubt, check it out with a qualified doctor, and then that you're kind of doing the best thing for you.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. So I always ask at the end of the podcast for one step that listeners can take today, and it can be anything. So it could be something we've covered or not, to start to improve their health.
Well, I would kind of encourage everybody to take a bit of an inventory of their light exposure over the day, and maybe do it for a week. Just do a little inventory and see, what was the first light that you saw in the morning? Was it natural light? Was it artificial light? And what about through your day? Were you mainly in natural light? Did you go outside? And if you were in artificial light, was it kind of in a fluorescent office, or kind of did you manage to get yourself next to a window? Just to gain a bit more awareness about your light environment, because we're talking a lot about these devices, but actually a lot of these devices are mimicking sunlight,
Yes.
And so a lot of the effect comes from giving your body light that it can deal with and it can manage. If you are exposed to too much blue light, and it's ironic, we're kind of talking on this technology.
I have my blockers on.
Yeah. It's daytime here, so I'm kind of data, but certainly in the evening, put your blue blockers on, check all the screens. But I think first of all, you need to kind of see what you're dealing with, because I think for a lot of people, it's like the food you eat, you don't realize until you start to really notice
it. Pay attention.
Something very simple like only seeing artificial light first thing in the morning could really be a game changer for some people. If you're that person who's looking at the news before you've even got out of bed, try a week where you don't do that, and you maybe stick your head out the window, or even better, go and stand on your grass for 10 minutes, do some Tai Chi or something. I think my first challenge would be just take an inventory. What light have you been exposed to, and how did you feel in each situation? If you're in this fluorescent lit office, did you feel as good as if you were walking outside?
Never, not for me. I think it's brilliant, because we can't improve upon or make change when we don't have the awareness. It's always the first step. So absolutely brilliant. Sarah, thank you so much. You have given us a lot to think about and to do today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And it was so nice to see you again after seeing you. Yeah, it was great.
Good to see you as well. For everyone listening, remember you can get the transcripts and show notes by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.